At my birthday lunch, I heard my daughter-in-law say, "There's no more room for that old woman in this house." I ate in silence. What she didn't know? I had $20 million and taught them the price of betrayal. The knife slipped from my fingers, clattering against the china plate. Nobody noticed. They never did. I was invisible in this house, my house, or at least it had been until I sold it to help Michael and Victoria with the down payment 3 years ago. I steadied my hand and picked up the knife again, mechanically cutting the roast beef Victoria had prepared for my 70th birthday lunch. The conversation flowed around me as if I weren't there. My son Michael laughed at something Victoria said, his eyes never straying to check if I was enjoying myself on my special day. "Mom? More? Potatoes?" Michael finally asked, his attention briefly flickering toward me. "No, thank you, dear. Everything is delicious." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but I'd perfected the art of pleasant smiles decades ago. Victoria beamed with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. At 42, my daughter-in-law was still striking with her perfectly highlighted, blonde hair and expensive clothes. She'd married Michael 5 years ago, his first marriage, her third. I had my suspicions about her intentions from the beginning, but I kept them to myself. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. Michael was 45 and had never found someone who made him happy. Who was I to interfere? "I'll clear these plates and bring out the cake," Victoria announced, stacking dishes with manicured hands adorned with a diamond bracelet I'd never seen before. "Let me help," I offered, rising from my chair. No, Evelyn, it's your birthday." "Just sit." Her tone was honey-sweet, but her eyes flashed with irritation. I sat back down obediently. Michael checked his phone, completely absorbed. In the kitchen, I could hear Victoria speaking to someone, her sister perhaps, who had called to wish me happy birthday, but somehow never got around to passing the phone to me. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. The walls in this colonial-style home were just thin enough that voices carried, especially when Victoria forgot to lower hers. I know, she was saying, her voice tense with frustration. "We're working on it, but it's complicated. She sold her house to help us buy this one." A pause. My hands stilled in my lap. "Obviously, we can't just throw her out, but honestly, I'm at my wit's end. There's no more room for that old woman in this house. Michael and I need our space." The room suddenly felt cold. I glanced at my son, but he was still engrossed in his phone, oblivious to the conversation happening in the kitchen, oblivious to how my world was crumbling around me. Old woman, that's all I was to her. An inconvenience, a burden. "We're hoping she'll agree to that retirement community I showed her last month," Victoria continued. "The money from selling her house is mostly gone now, but she must have some savings left. Michael says she's always been careful with money." Careful with money. A smile ghosted across my lips, despite the hollowness spreading in my chest. If only they knew. After Harold died 15 years ago, I discovered he'd left our finances in shambles. Everyone assumed I was set for life with his insurance policy, but the truth was far different. While I'd inherited our modest home free and clear, the insurance barely covered his medical bills and funeral expenses. I'd never told Michael. Never told anyone. Instead, I'd taken the real estate course I'd always dreamed about, started small with one fixer-upper, then another. I had an eye for properties with potential, and more patience than the flippers who wanted quick returns. Over 15 years, that first small investment had grown into a portfolio worth over $20 million, managed through a holding company no one knew I controlled. I lived simply, kept my wealth hidden. Not out of shame, but from a lifetime. Habit of privacy and independence. In our family, money discussions were considered vulgar. And after seeing how quickly Victoria began upgrading her lifestyle once she married Michael, I decided discretion was the better part of wisdom. Victoria returned with a small store-bought cake, a single candle flickering in the center. "Make a wish, Evelyn." I looked at her perfect smile, at my son's distracted glance up from his phone, and I knew exactly what to wish for. Not revenge. Something far more powerful. I blew out the candle. "What did you wish for, Mom?" Michael asked, finally setting his phone aside. "If I tell you, it won't come true," I said softly. As Victoria cut the cake, her diamond bracelet catching the light, I made a decision. I would give them exactly what they wanted, my absence, but not quite in the way they expected. I took a bite of cake that tasted like sawdust and smiled. "This is lovely, Victoria. Thank you for making my birthday so special. She nodded, already turning her attention back to Michael. So, about that trip to Aspen we discussed. I tuned out their conversation, mentally calculating my next moves. I had built an empire while everyone underestimated me. I had created wealth while living under the radar. I had survived loss, grief, and loneliness without leaning on anyone. I could certainly survive this betrayal. And perhaps, just perhaps, teach them something about the value of what they were so carelessly throwing away. Not the money. They knew nothing about that. But me, the old woman they thought they could discard so easily. I set down my fork, the cake barely touched, and excused myself to use the bathroom. In the hallway, I paused to look at the family photos Victoria had arranged on the wall. So many pictures of her and Michael, their vacations, their parties. Only one small photo of me, tucked in the corner, from Michael's graduation day 23 years ago. As I stared at my younger self, arm proudly around my son's shoulders, I felt something harden inside me. Not hatred, not even anger. Resolve. It was time to stop being invisible. It was time to show them exactly who this old woman really was. The week after my birthday passed in a strange fog. I moved through the house like a ghost, watching Victoria and Michael with new eyes. Had they always been this way? Had I simply refused to see it? I sat at the breakfast table pretending to read the newspaper while Victoria tapped away at her laptop. She was planning another renovation, the third since they'd bought the house. First it had been the kitchen, then the primary bathroom, and now she wanted to convert the sunroom into a proper home office. The contractor says we can start next month, she told Michael as he rushed through breakfast. It'll be about $30,000. I kept my expression neutral, but my mind was calculating. $30,000 for a sunroom conversion? The number was absurdly inflated. Victoria always chose the most expensive options, and I suspected she had arrangements with these contractors that benefited her personally. Whatever you think is best, honey, Michael replied, not even looking up from his phone. He'd become so passive in his own home. We'll need to figure out financing, Victoria added casually. Maybe we could— I'm heading out for a walk, I announced, folding my newspaper. Neither of them looked surprised or offered to join me. They never did. Once outside, I pulled out my phone and made a call I'd been contemplating for days. Diane. Phillips Law Office. A brisk voice answered. Hello, I'd like to make an appointment with Ms. Phillips. It's regarding estate planning. May I ask who's calling? I hesitated, then straightened my shoulders. Evelyn Grant. Tell her it's rather urgent. 2 days later, I sat across from Diane Phillips in her elegant office downtown. At 55, Diane had built a reputation as one of the best estate attorneys in the city. More importantly, she was known for her discretion. So, Mrs. Grant, what brings you in today? Diane asked after pleasantries were exchanged. I took a deep breath. I need to protect myself and my assets from my family. Her expression didn't change, but she leaned forward slightly. I see. And these assets are substantial? Yes. Approximately $20 million in real estate holdings and investments. Now Diane's eyebrows did rise. That's quite significant. And your family is unaware? Completely. They think I'm living on a modest widow's pension and whatever savings I might have left after helping them buy their house. I explained my situation, how I'd built my fortune quietly after Harold's death, how I'd sold my house to help Michael, and Victoria, and how I'd recently discovered they were planning to move me out. It seems, I concluded, that my daughter-in-law finds me inconvenient. Diane's eyes had hardened as I spoke. Unfortunately, I see this more often than you might think. Adult children and their spouses making decisions for their elderly parents without consultation. I'm not elderly, I corrected her with a small smile. I'm experienced. She laughed, a warm, genuine sound. Indeed you are. Well, Mrs. Grant, Evelyn, please. Evelyn. First, let me assure you that your assets are yours to control. Regardless of family expectations, you have no legal obligation to support your son or his wife. I nodded. I know that intellectually. But emotionally, it's complicated, she finished for me. It always is with family. We spent the next hour discussing legal structures, trusts, and protections. As we wrapped up, Diane hesitated, then spoke in a more personal tone. May I ask why you've kept your success a secret all these years? $20 million is quite an achievement. I gazed out her office window at the city skyline before answering. At first, it was because I didn't want Michael to worry. After Harold died, Michael offered to help me financially. Though I knew he could barely afford his own life. That was kind of him. It was. He's not a bad person, just weak in certain ways. After I started succeeding, it just seemed easier to keep things quiet. I enjoyed the independence, the privacy. I paused. And then Victoria came along, and my instincts told me to be careful. Diane nodded thoughtfully. And now? Now I need to figure out how to reclaim my dignity without destroying my son in the process. After meeting with Diane, I felt lighter somehow. Just having someone know the truth about me, the real me, not the fragile old woman my family saw, was liberating. That evening, I settled into the small reading chair in my bedroom, the only space in the house that felt truly mine anymore, and opened my laptop. I logged into the secure portal where I monitored my investments, properties, and financials. Everything was performing well. The apartment complex in Phoenix had finally reached full occupancy. The mixed-use development in Atlanta was ahead of schedule. The row of renovated brownstones in Chicago continued to appreciate. I closed the laptop and pulled out the small leather journal I'd kept since Harold died. Inside were my notes, ideas, and observations. A record of how I'd built my empire from nothing, while everyone thought I was just quietly grieving. There was a knock at my door. Michael poked his head in. "Hey, Mom, everything okay? You've been quiet lately," I smiled. "Just a bit tired, dear." He leaned against the doorframe, looking uncomfortable. Victoria and I were thinking, maybe we should look at some of those retirement communities again. The one with the golf course was nice, right? And there it was. So soon after my birthday, they were already making their move. "The Willows?" I asked innocently. Yes, it seemed lovely. Relief washed over his face. "Great. We could go tour it again this weekend." "That would be fine," I said, keeping my voice neutral. He hesitated in the doorway. "Mom, you know we love having you here, right? It's just that Victoria thinks you don't need to explain, Michael." I cut him off gently. "I understand completely." After he left, I reopened my journal and began to write. Not in anger, but with perfect clarity. I had been watching and waiting long enough. It was time to start my next strategic investment, one that would yield returns far more valuable than money. The truth was, I didn't need their house or their approval. I had built something they couldn't begin to imagine. What I needed now was to decide exactly how much of that truth they deserved to know and what lessons they needed to learn. I closed my journal and gazed out the window at the gathering dusk. Victoria and Michael thought they were making decisions about my future. They had no idea I was already 10 steps ahead, planning theirs. "Mrs. Grant, I have the information you requested." The man sitting across from me in the quiet corner of the cafe was unremarkable in every way. Average height, average build, nondescript clothing. Perfect for his profession. Daniel Morgan had been highly recommended by Diane as the most discreet investigator in the business. I accepted the slim folder he slid across the table, not opening it immediately. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Was there anything surprising?" He sipped his coffee before answering. "Your daughter-in-law has quite a history. This is her 4th marriage, not her 3rd as she claims." My eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. Her first husband was a college professor 20 years her senior. Marriage lasted 14 months, ended when his retirement fund was mysteriously depleted. Her second was a real estate developer who filed for bankruptcy 6 months after their divorce. The third, a surgeon, had to sell his practice to pay off debts accumulated during their 3-year marriage." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral despite the cold feeling spreading in my chest. "And each time?" She walked away. "With settlements, property, or assets. Never enough to trigger fraud investigations, but enough to establish a pattern." I glanced down at the folder. "And my son?" Daniel's expression softened slightly. He appears to be unaware. Credit checks show they're carrying significant debt, nearly $200,000 in credit cards alone, mostly in his name. There's also a second mortgage on your house that was taken out 8 months ago. "My house," I murmured, more to myself than to him. Technically, it was their house now. I had given them the money for the down payment, but the property was in their names. Still, I couldn't help thinking of it as mine. "There's more," Daniel added. "She's been making regular calls to a man named Elliot Winters, a real estate agent who specializes in luxury properties. They viewed several homes in the $3 to $4 million range in the last month. I nearly choked on my tea. On what income? Daniel's mouth twitched. Exactly. They can't afford it unless they're expecting a significant influx of cash. Or an inheritance. From a supposedly cash-poor mother-in-law, I thought grimly. I paid Daniel his fee plus a generous bonus for his thoroughness and discretion. Walking home, I felt the weight of the folder in my purse like a stone. Victoria wasn't just trying to get rid of me because I was inconvenient. She was systematically draining my son financially and likely planning to move on once she'd extracted everything of value. And Michael, my intelligent but emotionally vulnerable son, was completely blind to it. When I reached the house, I heard voices from the kitchen, Victoria and a woman I didn't recognize. I quietly hung up my coat and was about to announce my presence when I heard my name. Evelyn is so sweet, but it's becoming impossible, Victoria was saying. Michael works all day and I'm basically a full-time caretaker. I froze in the hallway. Caretaker? I required absolutely no care. I cooked my own meals, did my own laundry, and kept to myself most of the time. That must be so difficult, the other woman sympathized. My mother-in-law had dementia and we finally had to put her in a home. We're not there yet, Victoria sighed dramatically, but she's definitely becoming more forgetful. Last week she couldn't remember where she put her glasses. They were on top of her head. I nearly laughed out loud at the absurdity. Once, I had absent-mindedly pushed my reading glasses up while deep in thought. Victoria was now painting me as cognitively impaired. The problem is financial, Victoria continued, lowering her voice. She doesn't have much saved, and those facilities are expensive. Michael feels responsible, but honestly, we're stretched thin already. Couldn't she sell her house? The friend asked. She already did, to help us buy this place. We thought it would be a temporary arrangement, but Victoria trailed off meaningfully. I'd heard enough. I quietly retreated, went back to the front door, and then entered loudly, calling out, "I'm home!" The kitchen conversation immediately hushed. I walked in to find Victoria and a blonde woman about her age sitting at the island, with wine glasses. "Evelyn, how was your walk?" Victoria's smile was picture perfect. "Lovely, thank you." I smiled at the stranger. "Hello. I don't believe we've met. This is Stephanie, a friend from my yoga class," Victoria said. "Stephanie, this is Michael's mother, Evelyn." "Nice to meet you," Stephanie said, eyes assessing me as if checking for signs of the mental decline Victoria had just been describing. "Likewise," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm heading upstairs to rest before dinner." "Don't mind me." In my room, I finally opened Daniel's folder. Inside were financial records, property documents, and several photographs of Victoria with a tall, distinguished-looking man who was definitely not my son, entering and exiting what appeared to be model homes. There was also a copy of a life insurance policy Michael had taken out 3 years ago, with Victoria as the sole beneficiary. $2 million. That night at dinner, I observed Victoria with new eyes, noting how skillfully she manipulated Michael, how she subtly undermined him while appearing supportive. How had I missed this for so long? After dinner, I excused myself to make a phone call in private. Diane answered on the second ring. "I've been thinking about our conversation," I told her. "I'd like to set up a trust for my son's future protection, but with very specific conditions." "I thought you might," Diane replied. "I've drafted some options for you to consider. When can you come in?" "Tomorrow morning? Perfect. And Evelyn? Have you decided how you're going to handle the immediate situation?" I looked at my reflection in the mirror, a woman Victoria had dismissed as irrelevant, forgettable, and burdensome. A woman who had built a real estate empire from scratch through intelligence and perseverance. "Yes," I said calmly. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want, and then some." The next morning at breakfast, I waited until Michael had left for work before approaching Victoria. She was scrolling through her phone, probably planning her next extravagant purchase. "Victoria, dear," I said gently, "I've been thinking about what Michael mentioned, about the Willows." She looked up, immediately attentive. "Yes, I think it might be for the best. This house is your home, and you two need your space." The relief on her face was almost comical. "Oh, Evelyn, I'm so glad you understand. We love having you, but..." No explanations needed, I interrupted. But there is one small issue. Her expression immediately turned concerned. What's that? Money, I said simply. The Willows is quite expensive, and I'm afraid my savings won't cover it for very long. Victoria's face fell slightly. Oh, yes, that is a concern. I leaned in confidentially. I didn't want to mention this to Michael yet, but I recently heard from a distant cousin. It seems I might be receiving a small inheritance. Her eyes widened, immediately calculating. An inheritance? That's wonderful news. It's not substantial, I cautioned, watching her expression carefully. Perhaps enough to cover the Willows for a few years, but I thought you should know. Absolutely, Victoria said, her smile returning full force. We should celebrate. Why don't we all go out for dinner tonight? As she hurried off to make reservations, suddenly eager to spend money on me, I smiled to myself. The game had begun. The first piece was moved. Now I would wait to see how Victoria would respond. You've done what? Diane looked at me over her reading glasses, astonishment clear on her face. I've scheduled a tour of the Willows for tomorrow, I repeated calmly, sipping my tea in her office, and I've hinted to Victoria about a potential inheritance. Forgive me for being blunt, but are you giving in to them? I smiled. Not at all. I'm setting the stage. For the past week since mentioning the inheritance, I'd watched Victoria transform. Suddenly she was including me in conversations, asking about my preferences for dinner, even suggesting weekend outings. Michael seemed relieved by the change, interpreting it as Victoria finally warming to me rather than calculating her next move. The inheritance story was just phase 1, I explained to Diane. I needed to see how quickly Victoria's attitude would change at the prospect of money. And it was immediate, almost comical. I set down my teacup. Last night, she asked if I'd like to join them for a weekend at a lakeside resort next month. This from a woman who accidentally forgot to tell me about their Christmas vacation plans last year. Diane shook her head. She's transparent, I'll give her that. Only because I'm finally paying attention. I sighed. For too long, I wanted to believe the best about her for Michael's sake. And your son remains oblivious? I nodded, feeling the familiar ache of disappointment. He sees what he wants to see. Victoria is quite skilled at maintaining her facade around him. So what's your next move after the Willows tour? I smiled. I'm going to make Victoria an offer she can't refuse. The Willows retirement community was exactly as I remembered from our previous visit. Tastefully landscaped grounds, elegant, common areas, and apartments that were comfortable but ultimately still institutional. The sales director, Ms. Winters, remembered us from our previous visit and seemed particularly attentive this time. We've had a cancellation since you were last here, she informed us, leading us toward a ground floor unit. One of our premium one-bedroom apartments has become available. Victoria squeezed my arm. That sounds perfect, doesn't it, Evelyn? I nodded, playing my part. It does look lovely. Ms. Winters opened the door to reveal a moderately sized apartment with a small kitchenette, living area, bedroom, and bathroom. It was nicely appointed but still felt confined after living in my own homes for decades. This unit comes with our Gold Care package, Ms. Winters continued. 3 meals daily in our dining room, weekly housekeeping, transportation services, and access to all activities and amenities. It's wonderful, Victoria gushed, already mentally moving me in. And the cost? I asked directly. Ms. Winters smiled professionally. The Gold Care package for this premium unit is $6,500 monthly, with a one-time entrance fee of $150,000. I saw Michael wince slightly. Victoria's expression remained pleasant, but I caught the brief calculation in her eyes. That entrance fee is quite steep, Michael said hesitantly. It's an investment in quality of life, Ms. Winters replied smoothly. And it guarantees your mother will always have a place here, even if her financial circumstances change. On the drive home, Victoria was unusually quiet, clearly trying to figure out how my supposed inheritance would cover these costs. Michael kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. Mom, we don't have to decide anything right away, he said. There are other options we could explore. Actually, I said carefully, I'd like to move forward with the Willows. Victoria turned in her seat to look at me surprised. Really? You liked it that much? It seems like a sensible solution, I replied. You two need your privacy, and I'd like to maintain my independence. The activities program looked quite engaging. But Mom, the cost, Michael began. I've been thinking about that, I interrupted. I believe my finances can handle it. especially with this inheritance coming. That evening after dinner, I asked Victoria to join me in the sunroom, her future home office, that would soon displace the reading nook I'd created there. I wanted to speak with you privately, I began once we were seated. Woman to woman, Victoria looked intrigued. Of course, Evelyn. I know living with your mother-in-law wasn't what you envisioned for your marriage, I said gently. Oh, Evelyn. It's been a pleasure having you. I held up my hand. Please, let's be honest with each other. I overheard you speaking with Stephanie that day. I know you find my presence challenging. Her face flushed. I never meant... It's all right, I assured her. I understand completely. That's why I want to move to the Willows. But I'll need your help convincing Michael it's the right decision. Victoria's expression shifted to cautious interest. What do you need from me? Michael worries about my finances. He doesn't need to know all the details about this inheritance. It would only make him feel that he somehow failed to provide for me. She nodded slowly. I understand. Men can be sensitive about these things. Exactly. So I'd appreciate if we kept the specifics between us. I leaned forward. I'm prepared to put down the entrance fee immediately, but I'd like to ask a favor. In return. What kind of favor? Her voice was careful now. I've always wanted to see Michael settle into a home he truly loves. Your house is lovely, but I know you've been looking at properties in Lakewood Estates. Victoria's eyes widened. How did you... It's a small town, I said smoothly. I still have friends who keep me informed. The Mediterranean-style home on Cypress Lane is particularly beautiful. The house I mentioned was one Daniel had photographed her visiting with the real estate agent. A $4.2 million property that she and Michael couldn't possibly afford. It is stunning, Victoria admitted, her guard dropping slightly at the mention of her dream home. What if, I suggested, I could help make that possible? As a parting gift before I moved to the Willows. Victoria's breathing quickened almost imperceptibly. That's incredibly generous, Evelyn, but I couldn't possibly... Please, I interrupted. It would make me happy to see you and Michael in a home that truly reflects your taste and accomplishments. Could practically see the wheels turning behind her eyes, calculating how to accept this windfall without appearing too eager. We should discuss this with Michael, she said finally. Of course, I agreed. But perhaps we should wait until after I've moved? He might resist if he thinks I'm spending too much at once. Victoria nodded slowly. That makes sense. We wouldn't want him to worry. Exactly. I smiled warmly. I'm so glad we had this talk. It's nice to know we understand each other. After Victoria left the sunroom, practically floating with excitement, I sat alone in the gathering darkness. The trap was set. Now I just needed to prepare the final pieces of my plan. I pulled out my phone and texted Diane. Phase 2 complete. She took the bait. Scheduled a meeting for next Tuesday. Then I called Daniel Morgan. Mr. Morgan, I need one more investigation. This time I'd like everything you can find on Elliot Winters, real estate agent. And yes, I'm particularly interested in his relationship with my daughter-in-law. As I ended the call, I felt no triumph, only a deep sadness that it had come to this. But Victoria had forced my hand by targeting my son. And while I might be just that old woman to her, she was about to discover I was far more dangerous than she could have imagined. Chapter 5, The Table Turns. I'll have the salmon, please. I smiled at the waiter, handing him my menu. Excellent choice, Mrs. Grant, he replied with a respectful nod before turning to take Victoria and Michael's orders. We were seated at Marcello's, a restaurant that had opened just 3 months ago in the renovated historic district downtown. It was nearly impossible to get a reservation here, unless, of course, you happen to own the building and be a silent partner in the business. Victoria looked around appreciatively. How did you manage to get us in here, Evelyn? I've been trying for weeks. Oh, an old friend owed me a favor, I said lightly. I thought we should have a nice dinner before I moved to the Willows next week. The paperwork had been signed, the entrance fee paid from one of my smaller accounts. Victoria had been practically glowing for days, helping me sort through my belongings and discussing which furniture I should take with me. Michael still seemed conflicted. Mom, are you absolutely sure about this? It feels like everything is happening so quickly. I reached across the table and patted his hand. I'm sure, dear. It's time for me to start a new chapter. Victoria nodded enthusiastically. The Willows is perfect for your mother, Michael. Remember how much she liked the library and the garden club? In truth, I had found both mediocre, but I smiled and played along. It will be nice to be around people my own age. The waiter returned with our drinks. Michael raised his glass. To new beginnings, Mom. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my glass against his. If only he knew how true that toast would prove to be. As we enjoyed our meal, I guided the conversation carefully toward real estate, watching Victoria's reactions. I ran into Helen Wilson at the grocery store yesterday, I mentioned casually. She told me her son just bought a home in Lakewood Estates. Apparently, property values there are skyrocketing. Victoria's eyes lit up. It's a beautiful neighborhood, very exclusive. You've been there? I asked innocently. Victoria hesitated, glancing at Michael. We drove through once, didn't we, honey? Just admiring the architecture. Michael nodded absently, focused on his steak. Those houses are incredible. Way out of our league, though. Never say never, I said with a small smile. Life can surprise you. Victoria quickly changed the subject, but I had seen the flash of calculation in her eyes. She was already spending my money in her mind. After dinner, as we waited for the valet to bring our car, the restaurant owner approached me. Mrs. Grant, I didn't realize you were dining with us tonight. Paolo kissed my cheeks European style. I would have come out earlier to greet you properly. Michael looked between us, confused. You two know each other? Your mother is a very special person, Paolo said warmly. She believed in this restaurant when it was just an idea. Victoria's expression shifted from confusion to suspicion. What does he mean, Evelyn? I laughed lightly. I made a small investment in Paolo's restaurant. Nothing significant. Paolo raised his eyebrows but followed my lead. Your mother is too modest. I hope everything was to your satisfaction tonight. Perfect as always, Paolo. Thank you. As we drove home, I could feel Victoria's eyes on me from the front passenger seat, reassessing, calculating. Michael seemed oblivious to the tension, chatting about how delicious the food had been. When we arrived home, Victoria immediately excused herself to make a phone call. I knew without being told that she would be calling Elliot Winters, the real estate agent, revising her plans based on this new information about me. Mom? Michael lingered in the living room after Victoria disappeared upstairs. Is there something you're not telling me? For a moment, I was tempted to tell him everything. About my business empire, about Victoria's manipulation, about the trap I was setting. But the time wasn't right. He wasn't ready to see the truth yet. What do you mean? Dear? That restaurant owner acted like you were some kind of VIP. I shrugged. I helped him secure a small business loan. It was nothing, really. Michael studied me for a moment longer, then seemed to accept my explanation. I'm glad you're making these connections. It'll be good for you to have your own life at the Willows. If only you knew, I thought, but simply smiled. I'm looking forward to it. The next morning, I received a text from Daniel. Meeting confirmed for Friday, 1 p.m. All evidence collected. Perfect timing. I was scheduled to move to the Willows on Saturday. When Friday arrived, I told Michael and Victoria I had an appointment with my financial advisor to discuss the inheritance funds. Victoria offered to drive me, but I politely declined, saying I'd take a taxi. Instead, I had Diane's driver pick me up and take me to Lakeside Bistro, an upscale cafe overlooking the city's small but picturesque lake. It was the kind of place where business deals were made over expensive coffee, private enough for conversation but public enough to prevent scenes. Elliot Winters was already seated at a corner table when I arrived. Diane sat across from him, looking elegant and formidable in her tailored suit. Daniel Morgan stood nearby, keeping a discreet watch. Mrs. Grant. Elliot stood as I approached, extending his hand. A pleasure to finally meet you. Mr. Winters. I replied coolly, not taking his offered hand. I wish I could say the same. His smile faltered slightly as I took my seat. Elliot was exactly as his photos suggested. Tall, distinguished-looking, with carefully styled silver hair and an expensive watch that he probably couldn't afford. I was surprised to receive your invitation, he said, recovering his composure. Miss Phillips was somewhat vague about the purpose of this meeting. I thought it would be best if Mrs. Grant explained herself, Diane said smoothly. I took my time, arranging my napkin in my lap, taking a sip of water. Mr. Winters, you've been showing my daughter-in-law properties that are far beyond her financial means. He blinked, surprised by my directness. Mrs. Grant, client relationships are confidential. Save it, I interrupted. I know about the house on Cypress Lane. I know about the private viewings. I know about the text messages. Elliot's face paled slightly. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I nodded to Daniel, who approached and placed a folder on the table. This contains evidence of your relationship with Victoria Grant. Evidence I'm prepared to share with my son and your professional licensing board. Elliot didn't touch the folder. This is absurd. Victoria and I have a purely professional relationship. The photographs suggest otherwise, I said calmly, as do the hotel receipts. His jaw tightened. We all knew I wasn't bluffing. What do you want from me? Information, I replied. And your absence from my family's life going forward? For the next 20 minutes, Elliot confirmed everything I had suspected and revealed details even Daniel hadn't uncovered. Victoria had approached him 6 months ago, initially about selling their current house. Their relationship had quickly become personal. They had been planning to move in together after Victoria divorced Michael, once she had secured as much money from him as possible. She told me about your inheritance, Elliot admitted, said it would solve all their financial problems before she left him. I nodded, feeling a cold satisfaction at having my suspicions confirmed. And the house on Cypress Lane? A fantasy, he said dismissively. Something to keep her interested. She could never afford it. No, I agreed. She couldn't. After Elliot signed a statement Diane had prepared, agreeing to cease all contact with Victoria and acknowledging his ethical breaches, Daniel escorted him out. Are you all right, Evelyn? Diane asked once we were alone. I took a deep breath. I will be, once tomorrow is over. Are you sure you want to go through with this? We could handle it more privately. I shook my head. No, some lessons need to be learned publicly. That night, I finalized my preparations. My bags were packed for the Willows, though they would never arrive there. My most important documents and treasured photographs were safely stored with Diane. Everything was in place. At dinner, Victoria was particularly attentive, refilling my wine glass, asking about my day. Michael seemed relieved by our apparent bond, completely unaware of the storm about to break over all our lives. I've arranged for a car to take us to the Willows tomorrow, Victoria announced. Michael has that golf tournament, so I'll help. You get settled. That's very thoughtful, I replied. But I've made other arrangements. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. What arrangements? I've invited both of you to join me for lunch before I check in. A restaurant called Gardenia's at noon. Gardenia's? Victoria repeated. I've never heard of it. It's new, I said simply. And very exclusive. As I excused myself and headed upstairs for my last night in this house, I felt no triumph, only resolve. Tomorrow, the truth would finally be revealed, and nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 6. The True Value Gardenia's wasn't just a restaurant. It was the crown jewel of my commercial real estate portfolio, a restored historic mansion overlooking the bay. As our car pulled into the circular driveway, Victoria's eyes widened at the opulence, the manicured gardens, the marble fountain, the uniformed valets. Mom, are you sure about this place? Michael asked nervously. It looks extremely expensive. Don't worry, dear, it's all arranged. The maitre d' greeted us at the door. Mrs. Grant, welcome to Gardenia's. Your private dining room is ready. Victoria shot me a curious glance. Private dining room? We were led through the main dining area toward a set of mahogany doors at the back. The private room was intimate, but elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. A table was set for 4. Are we expecting someone else? Michael asked as we were seated. Yes, I said simply. She should be here shortly. Victoria was unusually quiet, her eyes darting around the room, no doubt estimating the cost of everything she saw. A waiter appeared with champagne, pouring 3 glasses. Compliments of the house, Mrs. Grant. Thank you, Anthony. Victoria couldn't contain herself any longer. Evelyn, how do they know you here? I smiled. Let's just say I have a connection. To the owner. The mahogany doors opened and Diane entered, elegant as always in a navy blue suit. Sorry I'm late, she said, taking the empty seat. I made the introductions. Michael, Victoria, this is Diane Phillips, my attorney. Diane, my son Michael, and his wife Victoria. Michael looked confused. Your attorney? I didn't know you had an attorney. There's quite a bit you don't know, I said gently. That's why we're here today. I nodded to Diane, who opened her briefcase and removed several folders. Before we begin, I said, I want you both to know that what happens next comes from a place of love. At least for you, Michael. Victoria shifted in her seat, her expression wary. What's going on, Evelyn? I took a deep breath. I'm not moving to the Willows today. In fact, I'm not moving there at all. Michael frowned. But we've paid the entrance fee, signed all the paperwork. Actually, I've paid the entrance fee. I corrected him. And I've already arranged to donate it to their scholarship fund for seniors who truly need assistance. Victoria's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. I don't understand. Let me be clear, I said, my voice steady. I know everything, Victoria. I know about Elliot Winters. I know about your plans to access what you thought was my inheritance. I know about your previous marriages and how they ended. And I know about your plans for my son once you'd extracted everything of value from him. The color drained from Victoria's face. Michael looked between us, confusion turning to alarm. Mom, what are you talking about? Diane slid a folder toward him. These are photographs of your wife with Elliot Winters, taken over the past 3 months. And these, she slid another folder forward, are records of their communication, hotel receipts, and a signed statement from Mr. Winters himself. Michael's hands trembled as he opened the first folder. Victoria remained frozen, her mind clearly racing for an escape route. This is absurd, she finally sputtered. These are fabricated. They're not, I said quietly. Just as your concern for me wasn't genuine. It only appeared after I mentioned a potential inheritance. Michael looked up from the photographs. His face ashen. Is this true, Victoria? She reached for his hand. Michael, your mother is confused. She's making things up because she doesn't want to go to the Willows. I don't need the Willows, I said calmly. I don't need your house. I don't need anything from either of you. I nodded to the waiter who pressed a button, the wall behind. Me slid open to reveal a display case containing photographs, newspaper clippings, and property deeds charting the growth of Grant Properties, my development company. This is my life's work, I said, gesturing to the display. After your father died, I rebuilt our finances from nothing. While everyone thought I was just a grieving widow, I was creating something remarkable. I stood and walked to the display case. I started with one small building and reinvested every penny of profit. Now Grant Properties owns 27 commercial buildings, 12 residential developments, and 5 luxury hospitality venues. I turned back to face them, including gardenias. Victoria's mouth fell open. Michael looked like he'd been struck. You own this restaurant? He asked incredulously. I own the building, the business, and the 3 acres of waterfront property it sits on, I confirmed, along with assets totaling approximately $20 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face had gone from pale to ashen. Michael simply stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question cut deeper than he could know. Would you have believed me? When have you ever really seen me, Michael? Not as your mother, not as a burden, but as a person in my own right? He flinched as if I'd slapped him. The truth is, I continued more gently, I kept my success private because I enjoyed my independence. And later, when Victoria came into your life, my instincts told me to be cautious. Victoria finally found her voice. So this whole time you've been testing us? No, Victoria, I replied evenly. You were the one playing games. I was simply paying attention. I turned to Michael. Your wife has been systematically draining your finances. Once she had access to what she thought was my inheritance, she was planning to leave you. Michael looked at Victoria, silently pleading with her to deny it. She couldn't meet his eyes. Diane handed Michael another folder. These are financial records showing the extent of your debt, along with a trust I've established in your name. It will pay off your existing debts and provide you with a fresh start. Victoria pushed back from the table. This is humiliating. You had no right. I had every right. I cut in, my voice sharp for the first time. You were destroying my son. She grabbed her purse. Michael, are you going to let her talk to me this way? Michael didn't move. He sat staring at the folders. The evidence of betrayal spread before him. I think, he said slowly, that you should go, Victoria. She stared at him in disbelief. You're choosing her over me? I'm choosing truth, he replied, his voice strengthening. For once in my life, I'm seeing things clearly. After Victoria stormed out, Michael and I sat in silence for several minutes. Diane excused herself discreetly, leaving us alone. I'm so sorry, Mom, he finally said, his voice breaking. I had no idea. about any of this. I know. I reached across the table and took his hand. I should have trusted you with the truth sooner. Where will you go now? He asked. Not back to the house? No, I smiled. I have a home of my own, a beachfront property about 20 minutes from here. I've owned it for years but rarely used. It. Michael shook his head in wonder. $20 million. You're a millionaire. My mother is a secret millionaire. Despite everything, I laughed. Not so secret anymore. Later that evening, as I stood on the deck of my beach house watching the sunset, I felt a profound sense of peace. The confrontation had been painful but necessary. Victoria was gone. Michael was staying with a friend, taking time to process everything. My phone buzzed with a text message from him. Can I come see your beach house tomorrow? I'd like to hear more about your business, about your life. I smiled as I typed my reply. I'd like that very much. For 70 years, I had lived by other people's expectations. I had been a dutiful daughter, a supportive wife, a self-sacrificing mother. I had allowed myself to become invisible, even as I built something extraordinary. But now, standing in the fading light with the waves crashing below, I was finally, truly seen. Not as an old woman to be tolerated or discarded, not as a convenient source of money, but as Evelyn Grant, businesswoman, strategist, survivor. At 70 years old, my life wasn't ending. It was just beginning.